The violation notice wasn't heavy, just smug. It curled slightly in my palm like it had already been crumpled and straightened again, and I stood on my own front porch reading the fine like it was written in a different language. They said my lawn was not in compliance with neighborhood standards. But a few houses down, the HOA president's 30-foot Sea Ray sat in his driveway, uncovered, unregistered, and judging by the dead leaves along its hull, parked for weeks. That boat had cost me a promotion, but I didn't know that yet. I moved into Oak Meadow Estates because I thought it was the kind of place you work toward. 2-car garages, sidewalks that looped like cul-de-sacs trying to hug themselves, retired veterans who waved whether you answered or not. And then there was him, Chuck Dallinger, HOA president. Type of guy who wore flag pins to mow his lawn, waved from his riding mower like a parade marshal, and called himself semi-retired, even though no one knew what he actually did. The first time I met him, he shook my hand with 2 of his. "Love to see young professionals investing in the neighborhood," he said. That was code for, "I see your sedan and modest landscaping and assume you won't be a problem." I had no intention of becoming one. My wife, Emily, wasn't home when I got the notice. She'd taken our toddler to her sister's place for the weekend. I stood there rereading the letter like a punishment essay, trying to figure out what was actually wrong with the lawn. The grass was cut. No weeds. I'd even edged the sidewalk lines last Saturday. The only possible violation? A small patch by the mailbox where the grass had yellowed from our sprinkler head leaking too much in one direction. That was it. 1 square foot of faded green. They fined me $175. When Emily got back that Sunday night, the notice was still on the counter. "What's this?" she asked, already digging through the diaper bag with one hand. I told her. She paused. "Is this because of the mailbox thing?" "I guess." They sent Chuck to hand me a welcome basket when we moved in. It had dog treats, and we didn't even have a dog. "Yeah." I scratched my head. "Feels like a setup." She frowned, half laughing. "You think he's targeting us?" "Not yet, but you've seen that boat, right?" She looked up. "Oh, yeah. It's been sitting there since Memorial Day. No tarp. Full-on rust patch on the trailer. That doesn't break neighborhood standards?" Emily gave me a look that was mostly exasperation and maybe 10% pride. "You're not going to let it go." "I'm just saying, if he wants to enforce standards, maybe he should follow them too." She sighed. "Just don't do anything crazy." I wish I could say I listened. That Friday, I went to the monthly HOA meeting. They held it in the back room of the clubhouse. Cheap stackable chairs, burnt coffee smell, and a dry erase board that hadn't been erased in months. Chuck stood at the front, polo shirt tucked into belted cargo shorts. He had a clipboard. Of course he had a clipboard. "As we begin," he said, "let's remember that the goal of this association is mutual respect and shared upkeep. We all chose to live here because we value order." I raised my hand. Chuck blinked. "Yes, sorry, remind me your name again?" "Nate." "Nate, sure." He gave a politician's smile. "What's your question?" "Is parking a boat in your driveway for 2 months considered shared upkeep?" The room shifted. One woman leaned forward. A guy in the back snorted. Chuck cleared his throat. "We allow temporary recreational vehicle storage during boating season. Is that in the rules?" "Well, it's been a courtesy, because I got fined for a brown spot the size of a shoebox." Silence. Chuck smiled thinner now. "We appreciate all residents who help keep the neighborhood beautiful. If there's a concern, it can be brought up through proper channels. I'm bringing it up now. We'll take it under review." He moved on like I hadn't spoken, but he didn't forget. The next morning, I found another notice in the mailbox. Same envelope, same red ink signature. This time, the violation read, "Improper storage of garden tools, rake and hose visible from curb." Fine. $50, I stood in my driveway staring at the rake that had just been used the evening before. It was leaned neatly against the side of the house, not even blocking the walkway. A neighbor walked by with her dog. She gave me a sympathetic smile. "Got the Dallinger treatment?" she asked. "This happened to you too?" 3 times, once for having wind chimes that were audible past 10 p.m. She shook her head and kept walking. That was when it hit me. This wasn't about the lawn. This was Chuck reminding me who was in charge. I took photos, not just of my lawn, but of his driveway. The boat, the expired registration sticker, the rust on the trailer wheel, the fact that his trash bins were out 3 days early. I went through the HOA handbook and highlighted every section he was breaking. I printed them out, 3-hole punched them, and made a binder. Then I got a call. Not from the HOA, not from Chuck, from HR. "Hey, Nate, can you hop on a quick call with me and Jenna from facilities?" My stomach dropped. That's not the kind of sentence you get on a Friday afternoon unless something's wrong. I clicked the link. Camera off. Jenna smiled too big. HR smiled too small. "Nate," she said, "I just wanted to check in about an anonymous report we got. Something about misuse of a company-issued laptop for non-work-related activities." "What?" I blinked. "I don't even use it outside work hours." "Well, someone sent screenshots. Apparently you were using HOA documents, forms, and bylaws." I felt the blood drain from my ears. "Oh," I said, "that's mine. I printed those from my personal account, but I might have saved the file on the wrong drive." They nodded, polite. HR read a policy about acceptable use. No formal reprimand, just a note in the file. But I knew exactly who sent it. Chuck worked part-time IT for a contracting firm, one that handled residential networks in our area. I remembered the name from his yard sign, and our Wi-Fi had been spotty for 2 weeks. Emily warned me again. "Just let it go. It's not worth it." He made it personal. I get that. But what are you going to do? Start a war over a lawn? No. I picked up the binder. "I'm going to win the one he already started." She looked at me like I was someone new. Not necessarily worse, just changed. The next HOA meeting, I brought 10 copies of the violations, one for each board member. I passed them out like pamphlets. Chuck watched me with a half smile. "Nice to see such passion from our residents, Shaban," he said. "Nice to see enforcement applied equally," I replied. He didn't respond. But the boat was gone 2 days later. What he did next made me realize this wasn't about a lawn or a boat. It was about control. And Chuck didn't like losing it. The truck came before sunrise. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when I heard the soft, rhythmic beep, beep, beep of something backing up. Through the blinds, I saw a flatbed trailer hitched to a white pickup with a magnetic decal on the door. Neighborhood Integrity Services. 2 guys in neon vests climbed out. One walked toward my side yard. The other unfolded a clipboard. That's when I noticed the bright orange tag zip-tied to my front fence. Notice of required correction. Unregistered structure. I didn't even have a structure. Just a freestanding tool shed. No bigger than a walk-in closet. I'd assembled it myself from a kit last year. It was behind a bush line, not visible from the street unless you stood at a weird angle. But apparently now it was a code violation. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. "Hey, can I help you?" The clipboard guy barely looked up. "You Nathan Myers?" "Yeah." "You've been cited for an unapproved exterior modification. We're authorized by the HOA to remove non-compliant structures pending appeal." "You're what?" The guy just pointed at the tag. "We can leave it on the lawn if you prefer." I stepped off the porch and walked toward them. "You're not touching anything. That shed's on my property." He shifted his weight. "Sir, we're contracted to—" "Then show me the contract. Show me the order." The other guy opened the truck door and pulled out a paper folder, but before he could hand it over, someone else arrived. Chuck. Of course. He pulled up in his red Jeep, windows down, Oak Meadow HOA sticker on, the windshield. He stepped out like it was a parade. Khaki shorts, aviators, that same damn clipboard. "Morning, Nate," he called out cheerfully. "Just trying to get everything tidied up back here." "You didn't send a letter. You didn't give me a warning." Chuck smiled like he was at a barbecue. Section 4, line 11. Structures erected without pre-approval can be removed at the HOA's discretion. "You mean like your boat?" He chuckled. "Well, that was seasonal. So's my life, Chuck. Want to tear that down too?" The contractor looked back and forth between us, clearly waiting on someone to blink. I walked straight over to the shed, opened the door, and stood inside. "Go ahead," I said, arms out. "Let's see how your policy works with me inside it." Chuck stiffened. "You're being unreasonable?" "No, I said. "I'm done playing reasonable." He left. The contractors backed off, said they'd come back once the dispute was resolved. I sent an email to the board that night with attachments, time-stamped photos, my original shed approval application, submitted last year, and a copy of the receipt. I CC'd the HOA's legal liaison, but the next day, my mailbox was gone. Literally gone. Post ripped out. No debris, no note, just a small mound of displaced dirt where it used to stand. I checked my doorbell cam. Nothing. Turned out the footage had mysteriously stopped recording between midnight and 4 a.m. Chuck had access to the HOA camera system. He also chaired the Community Watch subcommittee. Emily found me sitting on the curb, holding the remains of the old plastic mailbox flag I'd found in the bushes. "You're not sleeping," she said quietly. I nodded. "You've got work. We've got a 3-year-old, and this guy is literally tearing up our yard. I know you want to be right, but is this worth it?" I didn't pick this fight. She looked at me and didn't say anything for a long moment. Then finally, "Just don't lose yourself to it." I started documenting everything. Chuck's Jeep parked too close to the corner, obstructing line of sight. His Christmas lights still up in February. The unmowed grass behind his fence, clearly neglected. I created a Google Drive folder called Selective Enforcement. Shared it with the other residents I'd seen get ticketed. Soon, other neighbors started emailing me their own violations. Photos, letters, stories of fines for garden gnomes, wind chimes, even a kid's inflatable pool. One guy, Gary, had been cited 3 separate times for trash can visibility, even though his bins were behind a gate. "I swear this guy's got a vendetta," Gary told me over the phone, "but nobody wants to speak up." "Well, I said, "maybe it's time someone did." At the next meeting, I brought a manila folder stuffed with resident statements, printed emails, timestamps, cross-referenced rules. I didn't just pass them out this time. I read them aloud. One by one. A woman named Rita had been fined for hanging a prayer flag. "Foreign symbols," the violation said. Another man was warned for the visual clutter of a wheelchair ramp. People shifted in their chairs. Some nodded, others murmured. Chuck cleared his throat halfway through my presentation. "Nate, we appreciate your concern, but I'm not finished." He sat back, tense. "I'm not asking you to resign," I said, "but I am asking the board to vote on a temporary suspension of your enforcement authority pending investigation." Gasps, whispered comments. Chuck's jaw tensed. "You can't do that. This is harassment." I turned to the board. "It's in the bylaws. Section 7. If 3 or more residents present a signed grievance, a temporary vote can be called." I held up 3 signed forms. "I have 12. The vote didn't go my way. 3 for suspension, 4 against, 1 abstained. Chuck stayed. Still president, still smiling that shark's grin, but his voice cracked a little when he said, "Meeting adjourned." Afterward, in the parking lot, a woman I didn't know came up to me. "You're braver than the rest of us," she said quietly, "but be careful. He doesn't lose quietly." She was right. The next violation didn't come in the mailbox. It came through my job. An email from my manager. "Hi, Nate. Quick heads up. Someone forwarded your social media post to compliance. Apparently, there's concern about you publicly sharing community information that could be considered defamation. Might be nothing, but let's chat next week." I hadn't posted anything slanderous, just facts, photos, citations of the bylaws, no names, no insults. But someone had taken screenshots, cropped them, sent them to my employer. I knew who. I stared at the email for a long time. Then I shut my laptop and sat back. Chuck was escalating, using soft power, indirect pressure, no fingerprints. He wasn't just protecting his little kingdom. He was trying to break me. That weekend, I went door to door. I knocked. I introduced myself. I asked questions. I started with the people who'd sent me violation letters. Gary, Rita, the guy with the pool, and expanded outward. For the first time, I saw how deep this went. Quiet resentment, fear of speaking out, elderly residents afraid of retaliation, renters too intimidated to complain, a community held hostage by one man's quiet war. Chuck had turned the HOA into his personal ego project, but people were ready for change. They just needed someone to lead. I filed a petition for a special election. Not just to remove Chuck, to overhaul the whole board. It wasn't easy. I had to get signatures from at least 30% of the neighborhood. I walked in heat, in drizzle, sat with retirees and single moms and a guy who'd been fined for using solar lights. We crossed the threshold in 2 weeks. Chuck tried to block the petition on a technicality. We won that too. The special election was scheduled for the following month. But in the meantime, Chuck had one last card to play. Emily's car was towed. She was parked in front of our own house, in our own driveway, in broad daylight. The tow company said it was an anonymous complaint about abandoned vehicles. When she called me from the impound lot, she was crying. "Nate," she said, voice shaking, "he's going after me now." I stood in the empty driveway, the sun baking the patch where her tires had been. That was the moment it stopped being about winning. It became about ending him. The impound fee was $210. Emily didn't say a word on the way back. She just drove in silence, hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Our toddler, asleep in the back seat, snored softly through a sippy cup half full of grape juice. I didn't talk either. Not until we pulled into the driveway and saw the new sign. A stake planted in our front lawn. Oak Meadow Estates HOA. This property is under review for non-compliance. The same font as the welcome sign by the front entrance. Same red and navy palette. It looked official, except I'd never seen one like it before. Emily got out of the car, shut her door a little harder than usual, and walked inside without even glancing back. I pulled the sign out of the grass, metal tip bent. Cheap, but heavy. That's when it hit me. Chuck had stopped trying to hide it. This wasn't selective enforcement anymore. It was personal. That night, I stayed up till nearly 3. The living room was dark except for the laptop glow. I was neck deep in HOA bylaws, zoning codes, county ordinances, and a private Facebook group called HOA Survivors Midwest that I'd only been accepted into 48 hours earlier. Some of their stories made mine look like a warm-up act. Fences taken down, gardens bulldozed, dogs removed under nuisance animal clauses. But what caught my eye was a post from a retired paralegal named Trudy in Missouri. If your HOA is incorporated, most are, it falls under nonprofit corporation law in your state. That gives you more leverage than you think. She included a link to the State Public Records database. Oak Meadow Estates, HOA Incos. Status, active. registered agent, Charles Dallinger. It was all there. And with it, the clause that changed everything. Any officer found to have knowingly applied community rules in a discriminatory, retaliatory, or inconsistent manner may be subject to removal via community vote or legal petition. Chuck hadn't just broken rules, he'd weaponized them. I scheduled a community meeting, not an HOA meeting, a resident meeting, neutral ground, VFW Hall, 5 minutes from the neighborhood. I put flyers in mailboxes, posted in the Facebook group, even paid a local teenager to staple signs to phone poles. I called it the Oak Meadow Reset, and people showed up. 43 households, more than half the community. Some brought chairs. One guy brought donuts. Rita brought a freaking projector. I stood in front of them with a PowerPoint and a laser pointer I borrowed from work. I showed them photos, fines, memos. I read off rule sections and compared them side by side. How Chuck got away with things others got punished for. I showed them the tow report, the impound notice, the sign in our yard. And then I said what had been simmering in my head for weeks. This isn't about lawns. It's not about boats or sheds or bins. It's about power and what one man does with it when no one's looking. Silence, then nods, then applause, then questions. One woman asked, "Can we sue the HOA?" I shook my head. Technically, we are the HOA. Chuck's just been running it like we aren't. Gary stood up in the back. Then let's take it back. We formed a slate. 5 candidates, including me. People respected across the neighborhood. Gary the contractor, Sarah from the elementary PTA, Mrs. Lynn, who'd lived here since the subdivision broke ground, and a young couple who ran the neighborhood garden. We printed signs. We made door-to-door rounds. We passed out flyers with actual bylaws quoted on the back. Chuck, for once, went quiet. No new violations, no sarcastic emails. Just a big banner hung over his garage. Stability matters. Vote Dallinger. Underneath it, his Jeep parked at a slant, blocking the sidewalk again. 2 weeks before the election, we found our tires slashed. All 4 on Emily's car, 2 on mine. Nothing stolen, nothing written, no witnesses. Police filed a report. Said it could have been kids. Said they'd patrol more often. Emily didn't believe it. Neither did I. "Maybe we moved, she said. We were sitting on the floor with a pizza box between us. Our son had finally fallen asleep after refusing broccoli for the 3rd night in a row. "After the election," I said, "even if you win, what's left? They've taken your time, your energy, your peace." I didn't answer right away. Finally, if I back down, what's to stop the next Chuck? She looked down at the crust in her hand and didn't argue. Election day came. They held it in the same musty clubhouse where Chuck had once dismissed me in front of a dry erase board and 10 chairs. Now there were over 100 residents standing in line. Ballots were color-coded, names printed in block caps. Oversight by an outside election monitor hired after a petition request I'd filed 6 weeks ago. Chuck stood near the back, arms folded, watching the line. He didn't smile this time. Results were announced that evening. Our slate won, all 5 seats. Chuck wasn't just voted out. He came in dead last. No one clapped. No one booed. He just walked out. No goodbye, no concession, just silence. The next morning, Emily found me on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the sun creep over our mostly green lawn. She sat beside me and leaned into my shoulder. "So now what?" she asked. I smiled just a little. "Now we start fixing the neighborhood he broke." But I was wrong, because Chuck wasn't done yet. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from a lawyer claiming I had defamed Mr. Charles Dallinger. demanding a public apology and threatening a civil suit. I read it 3 times, sat back, and realized Chuck might have lost the vote. But he wasn't done playing dirty. The letter smelled like toner and threat, typed on thick legal stock, 3 pages long, folded twice like it was a resignation wrapped in a trap. The envelope had that cold kind of weight, not heavy, just full of implication. It was from a firm I didn't recognize, but the signature at the bottom was clear enough. On behalf of Mr. Charles Dallinger. The claims were worded like a threat and dressed up like a courtesy. Defamation of character. Emotional distress. Damage to professional reputation, all from my false and misleading public statements, distributed to neighbors and posted in community forums with the intent to incite hostility and cause reputational harm. They wanted a retraction, a written apology, and if not, they'd pursue legal remedies to the fullest extent allowed under state and civil code. Chuck hadn't just lost power. He wanted payback. I took the letter to a lawyer, a real one, not Facebook advice, not Reddit. Her name was Elena McLean. Clean office, direct tone, no fake smiles. She flipped through the pages, humming to herself, then set it down like it bored her. "He's bluffing," she said flatly. "How do you know?" "Because if he had a case, you wouldn't be reading threats. You'd be reading a summons." I must have still looked worried because she softened slightly. "I'll send them a response, declining your compliance and stating that your materials were fact-based, rule-cited, and spoken in a democratic context. That's protected. Let me deal with it." She slid the letter back to me. "He's used to bullying people. You're not the first." That last line sat with me longer than I expected. Emily was quiet when I told her. Not scared, not angry, just tired. "We have a kid," she finally said. "I don't want our savings going to fight this." "They won't," I said. "You sure about that?" I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. The next week, Chuck disappeared. Not in a mysterious way, more like a pulled plug. His Jeep stopped showing up. His mailbox overflowed. His blinds stayed closed. No one had seen him. Rumors started. He moved in with his daughter. He's filing bankruptcy. He's suing the developer over drainage. But no one knew for sure. What I did know was that Elena's letter had been delivered and signed for. Then everything went quiet. Too quiet. Meanwhile, the HOA board, our board now, had work to do. The first vote we passed, a freeze on fines for non-safety related violations. Second, a complete audit of all enforcement letters sent in the past 2 years. We found patterns, disproportionate citations for specific residents, no consistent standards, instances where Chuck had signed off on violations he himself was guilty of. We compiled a report and submitted it to the county's Community Oversight Office, not because we were looking for revenge, because residents deserved to know it wasn't just in their heads. And Chuck? Chuck had done damage that would take more than a report to repair. Then came the final twist. Elena called me on a Thursday afternoon. "You might want to sit down for this." "Why?" "Dallinger filed a counter-complaint with the State Board of Nonprofit Governance. He's accusing the new board, that means you, of election misconduct." I blinked. "That's what? How?" "He claims the election was illegitimate, that ballots were mishandled, and that you used your influence to bias the vote. He's petitioning to have the election nullified and the previous board reinstated pending a hearing." I laughed. Actually laughed. Out loud, like a guy losing his mind. He's really going to go that far? He has time. He has spite. And he doesn't care how ridiculous he looks if he thinks it might wear you down. Elena paused. "But he made a mistake." "What's that?" "He filed it after your audit reached the county. They're opening an ethics review on him." It felt like standing in a storm and realizing finally that the wind had shifted. that the man who'd planted signs in my yard, who'd fined me for a lawn and parked his own boat like a monument to hypocrisy, that he was now the one under review. But I didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. I felt tired, older, like I'd aged a year for every month I'd spent chasing him down. I walked the neighborhood that weekend, just by myself. No clipboard, no flyers, just me, hands in jacket pockets, nodding at the familiar porches. Rita waved from her garden. Gary gave me a thumbs up over a new mailbox he'd installed himself. Mrs. Lynn was sweeping her walkway. Her wind chimes, the same ones Chuck had fined her for, rang clearly in the breeze. It felt different, not perfect, but freer. That night, Emily sat down next to me on the porch. Our kid was inside, watching cartoons with the volume too low and the snacks too high. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Regret what?" "Not letting it go. Pushing through all this." I looked out at the street, at the houses, at the yard that had once cost me $175 over a yellow patch by the mailbox. "Know it," I said. "Even if he tries something else?" I smiled. "Then we'll beat him again, with facts, with votes, with neighbors who finally see each other." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "You really turned this place around," she said quietly. "I just pulled the weeds," I said. "Everyone else helped plant something better." A week later, we got the letter. Certified. Thick envelope. This one from the County Ethics Review Board. Inside, findings. Chuck had been officially sanctioned for abuse of power and selective enforcement. His nonprofit leadership status was revoked. He was barred from serving on any HOA board in the state for 5 years. There would be no new hearing, no reinstatement. Chuck was done. But the ending wasn't as clean as I expected. Because the next day, someone egged our house. Not teenagers. It was too targeted, too slow. 6 eggs, even spacing. One cracked against the porch light. No note, no camera footage, just that quiet, sticky mess. I cleaned it up before Emily saw it. Not because I was scared, but because I didn't want her to feel like we were still in it. Even if Chuck wasn't on the board anymore, some part of him still wanted to remind me he hadn't forgotten. I went to his house one last time, just to stand there, not to gloat, not to speak. The Jeep was gone, grass overgrown. That same damn boat had finally disappeared. The house looked smaller than I remembered, less important, less powerful, just a house, nothing more. I turned back toward mine. The sun was setting across the front yard, casting a long shadow over the edge of the grass where the yellow patch used to be. That little spot was green now, fully grown in. You'd never know it had been the start of anything. But I did. It rained the day the new bylaws passed. Not a downpour, just a slow, steady soak. The kind that makes grass greener and softens sidewalks. The kind that smells like soap and soil and second chances. Emily and I sat under the porch overhang, our son kicking a soccer ball barefoot on the wet driveway, sliding more than scoring, but laughing anyway. The vote had gone through unanimously. The board approved every reform we'd written over the last month. No fines without written warning and photo documentation. A rotating enforcement committee. Elected, not appointed. Anonymous reporting eliminated. All board meetings recorded and posted online. And perhaps most importantly, no board member could serve more than 2 consecutive years. We named it the Community Fairness Act. It didn't erase the damage, but it made sure no one else could pull a Chuck. The audit report went public the following week. We printed it and hand-delivered it with newsletters, just like Chuck used to do, except this time, it included a phone number for resident feedback and a Know Your Rights section on the back. No threats, no hidden fines, just facts. And a way forward. We even put a QR code on the last page. It linked to a poll asking residents what they wanted to prioritize. Top answers: community garden expansion, a shade structure by the park, less HOA drama. That last one made us laugh. Not because it wasn't fair, but because it was finally safe to say it. Chuck never showed up again. No final meeting, no letter of resignation, no post on the forum. He didn't even list his house for sale. Just left it to overgrow until a real estate agent eventually came by with a clipboard and a lockbox. Word spread that he'd moved out of state. Some said Florida. Some said Arizona. I didn't care. He'd gone from president to a rumor. A warning wrapped in khakis and paperwork. What stayed with me, more than any meeting or notice or fine, was what came after. A kid on the next block painted a mural on their backyard fence. Wild colors, abstract shapes, full of energy. No one complained. Mrs. Lynn added 2 new wind chimes. Gary built a ramp for his elderly neighbor without having to request modification forms. And one night, I got a knock on the door. It was the woman with the prayer flag. She handed me a pie. "Just thank you," she said. Then she left. Emily and I didn't talk about Chuck anymore. Not directly. We didn't have to. Every time she parked in our own driveway without checking over her shoulder, every time I watered the lawn without photographing it afterward, it was enough. Even our son picked up on it. "Daddy," he said one morning, "why don't we have the sign anymore?" "What sign?" "The one that said our house was bad." I knelt down. "Because it was never true," I said, "and now we make our own signs." He thought about that, then pointed at a dandelion sprouting from a sidewalk crack. "Can I pick that?" I smiled. "Go for it." A month later, the HOA hosted its first real block party. Not the stiff, approved vendor cookouts Chuck used to throw with cold hot dogs and rules about folding chairs. This one had music. Kids running barefoot. Someone set up a bounce house. One neighbor grilled ribs and refused to take money. Another brought a karaoke mic and sang off-key 90s songs that everyone still knew the words to. Emily swayed with me under a string of lights that Gary had zip-tied to every mailbox on the street. "This almost feels like a neighborhood," she whispered. "It is a neighborhood," I said. "Now, finally." She looked at me, eyes soft. "You didn't just fight back. You built something better." I shrugged. All I did was tell the truth. I kept the original fine. The $175 one for the lawn. Framed it, actually. Hung it in the garage next to my mower. People laugh when they see it. They don't know it's a trophy. But I do. Because it started with a patch of grass and ended with a community that remembered what it meant to belong to each other. No power plays, no gatekeeping, just neighbors. And maybe a slightly crooked shed with a rake, leaning proudly outside. If this story moved you, subscribe for more real-life confessions and emotional journeys like this one.